I am making this video as a continuation of how to make bespoke trousers. You ought to have quite a firm understanding of how I make trousers in the first place, because I will be skipping over a lot of what is the same. This is one of a few ways to make a trouser based. I like this one because it balances readiness for the main make, the finish, as well as the speed and reliability of the baste itself. To start with, the cutting and preparation is largely the same. However, the most important thing to note is that we cannot cut the top of the side seam along the pocket opening. We shouldn't cut the blind and facing at this point either, because if we change the trouser around the top of the side seam, then we'd need to change the pocket as well. We need to mark stitch, put in the darts, prepare the waistband, overlock the pieces, prepare and apply the flies. The first next important thing to do differently is when applying the fly. I am going to press the waistband down, so I need to put on the fly differently here. This is how I prefer to put the fly on anyway these days. We line them up like normal and start sewing, back tacking onto the notch at our small centimeter seam allowance. When we get towards the waistband, we need to cease sewing. We need to find the mark stitched waistline and mark 1 centimeter below that onto the fly. We need to machine up to that point and back tack. This way the top of the fly above the waistband is free to move around as it pleases. To constantly reiterate, we completely skip putting in the pockets because it takes a while and makes the trouser more difficult to change. Hence, we skip straight to putting the back and front trousers together. We can use a wider stitch length when doing these stitches so that the intern can more quickly and easily take the trouser apart when the fitting is done. We do the side seams the same way, but we can do it without basting and save ourselves plenty of time. First, I am putting them together to check the balance because I am not bothering to baste the seam, like I say. Always with the front trouser on top. There's really no other way to do it, to be honest. To sew a long side seam like this without basting, we hold the cloth on the bottom and direct that to determine our seam allowance, the direction of machining. With the piece on top, we almost want to offer that to the machine. We don't want to hold it tight. We need to allow the machine to take as much as it wants. I'm not pulling the bottom fabric either. I'm just making sure there's no slack. I'm not resisting the machine, only making sure that the bottom cloth isn't loose. I am not holding the top of the fabric tight here at all, just enough to direct it under the machine foot so that it is properly sewn to the bottom fabric. The flip side here, though, is that if we almost push the cloth into the top of the machine, it can wind up with a lot of ease, and the top will end up much shorter than you want it. It's important that the balance of the seams is correct. If one seam is longer than the other because of how it is curved, then we almost can't do it without basting because we need to ease in bits and pieces. I think it takes having done a fair few seams, but I got it on my first try after it had been explained. Then I got a badly balanced seam and it went whoopsie. And another time I did ease in far too much. It can be useful and is quick and easy to place some pins at the balance points to hold it better for you, but it'll save time if you learn to machine long seams without basting first. We press the seams open as we would, except it's even easier because there's no pocket to deal with. At this stage, as usual, we'd put on the waistband. Firstly though, we need to mark the overlap of the fly side next to the zip, so I measure 7mm from the seam on the zip into the trouser, and mark that onto the waistline. Since I have a left and right waistband with a cutout on the bearer, we need to line up the correct waistbands first. For both, it is very similar to normal, except we can sew across the waistband in one easy shot. Firstly, place the bearer side of the waistband up to the bearer of the trouser, so that there is about 1 centimeter of waistband past the trouser. mark on the waistband where the overlapping 7mm is. Measuring from that mark half the waist measurement, marking that onto the waistband as well. Mark the waistline and inlay like normal, basting on the waistband like normal, obviously, except there are no pockets to think about. Sew the waistband seam in one shot this time, either from the front or the back, keeping in mind the basic things with regard to sewing it on, except with a wider stitch than normal so that it's easier to unpick later. Similar to normal on the fly side, except I'm starting from the center front of the trouser because I want an extension on the waistband. Again, marking the center front of the trouser onto the waistband, measuring as always half the waist measurement. Once basted, stitch down the waistband again with a larger stitch. This time I want to back tack onto the center front, where the trouser is folded and level with the top of the back's tack on the fly. We press the seam as always before pressing the whole seam down. We press everything except the fly down. Though, fold the fly out of the way and make sure the waistband inlay is folded down neatly again before folding the fly back over the center front, pressing over the seam again. Check the length of the waistband and sew the seat seam as you normally like to. However, we only need to make one machine stitch. We do not sew over the seam twice. Still with a wider stitch. When doing the fitting, if it's too tight, you want the stitching to tear instead of the fabric, especially around the seat. Completing the seat as very normally as well, afterwards checking the waistband length from the center front to the 7mm overlap mark. To finish the waistband, all that really needs to happen is basting either side of the center back inlay and seam allowance of the waistband, as we usually do, forcing it down slightly from the top of the waistband. Do baste on the center front of the fly to keep the seam folded towards the insides. When finishing the zip, if you can machine it, machine of course, God I'm gonna get tired of saying it, with a wider stitch, or otherwise, if not, you're not going to machine it, secure it with a very secure baste. At this time, we can baste on the hooks and bars while preparing the J-stitch, sewing down the fly. Always, as always, starting with the hook. Like I say, we may need to move and baste the top of the zip down out of the way. Fold it so that the zip tape goes across the waistband towards the side seam. This does depend whether the zip actually goes above the waistband. It's just a case of tucking it away if it does. We don't really need to start a new baste for the hook. Position the hook about in line with the center front, basting through the holes, if anything, more thoroughly than usual. Do make sure that it can't move back and forth, otherwise it'll compromise the fitting because the waistband length isn't correct. Like I said, basting the J-stitch, and at the bottom we can go to the inside of the trouser and baste the bottoms of the fly and bearer together. Before placing the bar, because I have the bearer's silesia already attached, I need to tuck it away and baste it down. Ideally, the silesia wouldn't be sewn on at this stage, but that's for another video. To place the bar, it's much easier because we mustn't make a hole. Find the position in the usual way you would, but we will only baste the holes onto the waistband. Again, thoroughly basting the outer perimeter of the holes in order to keep the bar from moving. We do the hems very much like normal, whether we want cuffs or a slanted hem, though if there happens to be more than 5 centimeters of inlay, then we leave all of it, rather than cutting it away, so without overlocking or pinking away the excess. Though you may like to pink the raw edges so that it doesn't fray too much anyway. At this stage you can decide whether you want to change anything if they're your trousers. I understand there will be a fitting series on Savile Row Tales by Tom Mahan, so I expect that'll be a good resource for learning to fit clothes. In essence, to take down the trouser, we just need to take out all of the bastes, undo the seat seam and zip stitches, remove the waistband, and undo the inside and outside leg stitching. We make the new marks as appropriate, possibly recut the inlays, and start making the trouser for real.